So I don't know if it's gonna be up by the time this video goes up, but I'm working on a channel trailer and I'm really excited for it. So if it's up by the time this video goes live, please go watch it and tell me what you think. Hello there, I'm Simon. Welcome to my channel. Today's topic has been covered online before, but I'm gonna do it anyway because I want to come to my own conclusions. This time I'm talking about the little blue people known as the Smurfs. But I'm gonna take them just a little more serious than they were probably meant to be. Because today I'm looking at their political system. Side note, this actually goes back to my days as a history student. Long story short, one day we were sitting in the auditorium before class. I think it was history of the Middle Ages, and I happened to overhear part of a conversation between some fellow students, and I heard one of them say that the Smurfs are like totally communist. But are they? That's what we're looking into today. Now, I don't think I really have to explain the Smurfs to you. They're pretty well known, so if you don't know who the Smurfs are, I mean, they're all over Google. But I do think it might be a good idea to talk a little bit about what it actually means to be communist. Now, in the first half of the 19th century, there was this guy called Karl Marx, who decided it needed to be clarified what a communist ideology actually is. So he held a couple of conventions with his fellow communists to talk it all through. And then he sat together with his friend Frederick Engels to write a kind of document to sum it all up. A manifesto, if you will. And thus in 1848 they published the Manifesto of the Communist Party, aka the Communist Manifesto, which is a must-read if you want to learn about communism. Now, the manifesto talks a lot about the historical development of the bourgeoisie and the proletarians, which is extremely interesting, but also sort of irrelevant here, so I'm not gonna go too deep into it now. If you want to know, you can ask your local history teacher, or you can just go back to the source and just read the manifesto for yourself. Now, other than the historical background, the manifesto also goes into what the communists actually believe and want. And let's be honest, it wouldn't be a very good manifesto if it didn't, now would it? So what do they actually believe? Well, according to the manifesto, two sides, two classes evolved, because history. On the one hand, the bourgeoisie, and the proletarians on the other. Now, the bourgeoisie as a class is defined by their capital, their money. They kind of sort of build their lives around gaining and increasing wealth. And over time, they managed to build structures and systems that got way ingrained into society. Unfortunately, they often do that wealth gathering on the backs of the people who actually do the work, but very little of the wealth gathering. Those people are the proletarians. Because of all that, the bourgeoisie holds like 95% of the wealth. I should note that this is an estimation for the sake of rhetoric on my part, and I bleeping hope that it is an exaggeration. The point is that they have the lion's share, while the proletarians do all the work. And that's not very fair, is it? So Marx and friends said that the world needed a revolution to take back all that wealth and redistribute it, and to get rid of all those systems, a kind of reset, if you will. Now, to be clear, it's not so much the abolition of private property that they believe in. No, they believe in a meritocracy. They believe that everyone should be able to own the fruits of their own labor. It's just that that understanding of property is rather different from the bourgeois understanding of it. By that understanding, the only fruit proletarians get for their work is a wage, which does not give them property. It just gives them the means to survive. Barely. Communism is not about abolishing property and freedom. It's about making sure that it is for everyone, not just the bourgeoisie. And about preventing the bourgeoisie, and by extension anyone really, from subduing other people for financial gain. And so communism is getting rid of all the established systems, including religion, because these are systems that are being employed to oppress the proletarians and to keep them in check. To quote Marx, "Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of the heartless world, and the soul of the soulless condition. It is the opium of the people." End quote. They keep the proletarians calm and make sure they don't rise up. And all that is why the proletarians need to rise up. In fact, it is inevitable that there will be a revolution to get rid of all these systems and to create a new society without all those systems. A meritocratic society that doesn't oppress people for financial gain. And this is where we finally get to the point. Because the manifesto now lists 10 demands, or guidelines, I guess, 10 commandments, if you will, as to what the communist society does need. Because clearly, it's not the bourgeoisie. Number 1. Abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. Number 2. A heavy progressive and graduated income tax. Number 3. Abolition of all rights of inheritance. Number 4. Confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. Number 5. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. Number 6. Centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. Number 7. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, the bringing into cultivation of wastelands and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan. Number 8. Equal liability of all to labor. Establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. Number 9. Combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries. Gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country by a more equable distribution of the population over the country. Number 10. Free education for all children in public schools. Abolition of children's factory labor in its present form. Combination of education with industrial production, etc., etc. As you see, a lot of these have to do with getting rid of the oppressive measures that the bourgeoisie put in place, or at least measures that evolved historically and that the bourgeoisie used to oppress and abuse proletarians. They also have to do with centralization and the control of pretty much all means of economy by the state. In fact, the manifesto literally states that, at least in the beginning, some despotic means might be necessary to bring this into reality. I guess the problem is that real humans just can't seem to actually get past that despotic step. With all that said, it's about time to have a look at what all that means for the Smurfs, right? That's what we were actually talking about. First thing to note is that there doesn't seem to be any antagonism towards the bourgeoisie, mainly because there doesn't seem to actually be a bourgeoisie in the first place. I mean, there are some Smurfs who seem to be doing less of the labor and who still benefit from the results just because they, well, get to live in the village, like Brainy or Lazy Smurf, but generally they all seem to just chip in on the labor when it needs to be done, like when the dam needs to be fixed for the nth time. And there's certainly no one profiting monetarily on the backs of all the laborers, because the Smurfs don't even have money. There's actually a couple of stories about what happens when they do discover money for a bit, and believe me, it does not go well. At the end, they always decide, that was a bad idea, let's never do that again. So, based on that, I'm kind of inclined to say that, yes, the Smurfs are pretty darn communist. But if we want some kind of objective judgment, let's try that checklist Marx gave us. So, number 1. Abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. This definitely applies to the Smurfs. Apart from their homes and maybe a garden if they want to, they basically have no private lands. Admittedly, there are the fields and such, which are practically used exclusively by Farmer Smurf, but he doesn't seem to actually own them. He's just in charge of farming them, hence his name. Number 2. A heavy progressive or graduated income tax. Nope, they don't even have money, so no incomes or tax either. Number 3. Abolition of all rights of inheritance. Well, Smurfs never seem to actually die, so it's never actually an issue. But they also have no descendants, so I'm not sure who would even be the heir. So I'm gonna consider this a yes. Number 4. Confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. They don't really have either, but the way I know the Smurfs, they wouldn't. They wouldn't even consider confiscating people's stuff. Not the Smurfs that I know. Number 5. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state, by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. Again, no money. Need I say more? Number 6. Centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. Well, keep in mind that the Smurfs live in the middle of a forest in a medieval-style fantasy world, meaning they don't quite have the kind of technology we do. They have no telephones or trains or email or anything like that. Both messaging and transport for them is basically storks. Number 7. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. The bringing into cultivation of wastelands and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan. I mean, they don't really have factories, but they do have other instruments of production, like fields or barns. As far as there is a Smurf state, it does seem to own all of that. aka, no one really owns them at all. They're everyone's. And ultimately, it's just Papa Smurf, the despot, who decides what happens with them. They're also not actually cultivating any wastelands or anything, because they don't need to. They've got everything they need. Cultivating more would be excessive. Number 8. Equal liability of all to work. Establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. Sure looks like it. If you read the comics, you see that whenever there's a big build, every single Smurf joins in on the labor. Though they don't seem to have anything like an industrial army. There's just not enough of them for that. Number 9. Combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries. Gradual abolition of all the distinction between town and country by a more equable distribution of the populace over the country. Well, the Smurfs are just one small village that is basically one nation, so they're just too small to distribute any populace. So there's not even any considering that. Number 10. Free education for all children in public schools. Abolition of children's factory labor in its present form. Combination of education with industrial production, etc., etc. Now the Smurfs don't have a lot of children, but there are 5 junior Smurfs, and they sure don't work. They seem to mostly be doing what they want in the comics. But there is also a school that appears in the comics. And if it's anything like everything else in this village, it's not privately owned. So I'm gonna say yes to this one. So some of these don't really apply to the Smurfs, but that's mainly because they are a very small community of 101 Smurfs living in a medieval-style fantasy world. So they either don't need it or it's just not applicable to them. So perhaps not by the very letter of the manifesto, but in spirit, the Smurfs are very much communists. And they are bleeping nailing it. So that's my conclusion. Time for the YouTube thing. Let me know down below what you think by leaving a comment. Also, you can click the like button if you like the video and share it with all your friends. And if you got this far in the video, it probably means you like my stuff. And there's plenty more where that came from. So you can go to my channel and check out all my other videos. And while you're there, you might as well subscribe if you haven't already. And in the description box below, you can find all my sources and also the links to my Twitter and Goodreads where you can go follow me if you want. That's it. Thanks for watching.